Welcome back, and thanks so much for staying with Africa News Network First Fast Live. My name is Cindy Mabi. And the SACP says a white monopoly capital is an invention of the British PR agency, which is associated with the Gupta family. But the Communist Party conveniently forgets the phrase was the term used decades ago. SACP General Secretary Blade Nzimande says white monopoly capital is a diversion from issues of state capture, which are associated with President Jacob Zuma and the Gupta family. But Nzimande says the Gupta family is not the answer to white monopoly capital, which is an admission of its existence. Meanwhile, the SACP's shift from workers' struggle to form a pact with organizations like Save SA raises questions about the voice of the left changing focus for political expediency.
White domination of the economy continues, whilst millions of black people remain outside the realm of the economy. There is no way we as progressive people belonging to the Congress movement can allow a concentration and monopolization of our country's national resources amongst the few, whether those few are black or white.
Since 1921, the SACP's struggle has been against monopoly capital of one form or the other. And we don't know this notion of white monopoly capital. That we might have flattered it with it does not justify that some Bell Pottinger firm from the UK has now used this as a cliche to try and justify looting in our country. Much, but not all of this popular decline is related to the almost daily revelation of, I must say, embarrassing scandals involving highly placed ANC politicians in government, and particularly those who have been entangled with the notorious Gupta empire. The Guptas are not an answer to monopoly capital. In fact, they are two sides of the same coin. They both want to accumulate, the one using your regulatory capitalist regime and the others using looting.
We can never be dragged to a situation where the ANC loses its standing with the people because of one family. In 2012, they started in NUM, Guptas, trying to change its leadership, putting money in so that those who will be their own people comes in. They didn't win. Each and every union, because comrades, their aim is to control your leadership. Luckily, in the party, I've not heard that there are any influence of the Guptas.
It's absolutely important to form the broadest patriotic front in South Africa, okay, around the defense of the Constitution and our democracy, because that's being threatened. And that will include alliances with Save South Africa forces, with Business Leadership South Africa, who came to our Imbizo as the Communist Party, the faith-based organizations, many of whom are not pro-ANC and certainly are not not communists, okay, not in their remotest dreams. But they recognize the role that the Communist Party has been playing in the defense of the democracy and of our Constitution.
And joining us in studio, J.R. Akotia, a student activist. We have Udo Khoza, political analyst and columnist, on the phone. Lucky Tekisho is Deputy President of Transform RSA. Good evening to you, and thanks so much for your time. We're still on the white monopoly capital, whether it exists or not, or whether it's a fragmentation or rather an imagination from a PR company. Tekisho, your stance is Transform RSA on this matter.
Yeah. I think it's really an issue that is a moot issue, because you see it's glaring for all of us to see that indeed white monopoly capital is there. There's no doubt about it. So a number of people have wrote about it, including Professor Malikana, who outlined very well where it was said, which phrases, which paragraphs, and it's clear that even Comrade Blade said it, not once, not twice. And it's disingenuous for Comrade Blade today to say there's no such. We know we are feeling it, it's there. And we are saying is there as a transform RSA.
But why then the perpetual reference that this was brought by Bell Pottinger and that the UK-based PR company had come to create racial division and just cause unnecessary chaos?
No, in our view is that this white monopoly capital concept was there even before Bell Pottinger was here. So it has been in our vocabulary for a very long time. And we grew up knowingly that there is white monopoly capital. And our view is this is made an issue because of factional politics. You know, there are people who wants to defend white monopoly capital by saying there is no white monopoly capital, which is really unfortunate and is wrong. It mustn't happen.
Now, from a student activist point of view, JR, in the political climate that we find ourselves, very murky waters, it's about to get even more convoluted closer to the elective conference. Where do you find your concerns as a student body or young people when it comes to how things are being played out? Do you feel that your concerns are being prioritized?
In terms of the discussion around white monopoly capital and itself. Look, if you want to link the discussion of white monopoly capital to institutions of higher learning, I think last year there are many lessons which have been learned through the Fees Must Fall movement. And one of the biggest notions coming out of the Fees Must Fall movement is the notion of saying that we want to decolonize our space, or rather transform our space into a space which is more suited towards the African student. Now, when you look at that little sphere in South Africa in terms of higher education and you want to connect it to the bigger discussion which is currently happening, we must face a reality in South Africa that a lot of the divisions that we have in our society are deep-rooted not only on a class basis, but also on the basis of race. And we can't take that away. The discussion currently in society about white monopoly capital versus monopoly capital in itself is a discussion that seeks to steer us away from the greater underlying issues of what is the influence of capital in the 21st century in South Africa and on a global level. Because I think when we scale it down to a myopic discussion of what is the color of this monopoly capital and want to get into a fist fight to say that no, it's not white, it's not black, doesn't have a color, it doesn't stop us from approaching the question of how does that change the life of the ordinary citizen at the end of the day. And the reality is that in terms of our racial divisions in South Africa, if white privilege does exist in our country, why can't there be a discussion which seeks to say that in terms of capital, at the heights of our economy, there's a small group of people and we need to be able to characterize that group of people in order for us to identify them and deal with them effectively. And unfortunately, the truth is that it's not only white monopoly capital in South Africa, but it's white male monopoly capital.
All right, let's get Udo Frozer, a political commentator, on the phone line. Thanks so much for joining us. Good evening to you. You've brought us literature on end on the subject of white monopoly capital. I'm swiftly going to move along to just say, how does the denialism of it all, particularly with the SACP, take away from the glaring reality of inequality, poverty, and huge unemployment, largely among the majority black?
Well, it's always the same old, it seems. South Africa has an exclusive oligopolistic warehouse and rent-seeking economy with a huge structure of black poverty, which is structured poverty, so that people will never be able to enter the economy at all. And this is part of white monopoly capital, and at the moment this is the reality of this country, and which has to be changed. Hence the strong feeling to change the economy drastically and radically, and including the land, because the land is very much part of it. The SACP's and Zimande feels betrayed, he says. Gauteng's SACP leader David Makuro claims the SACP loses the moral authority. It's all terribly sad, and it all sounds really terrible in this country at the moment, in pre-election and pre-gathering of voters. The SACP's gathering, for example, takes place in the mid of positioning for the forthcoming ANC conference in December this year, as well as the presidential and national elections in 2019. This minority party and party of the three-partite group that governs South Africa focuses on the same topic as all opposition parties and the media. It is to root out all corruption in order to clean up the government, so they say. Obviously, in these times, political electioneering and positioning and posturing are very much part of the deal. So one needs to take everything with a bit of a pinch of salt, I believe. Because what will happen after the elections? Will they focus on the inequality? Will there be anything done? Will the politicians stick to what they are preaching today beyond 2019? We need to find that one out.
All right, please stay on the line, Mr. Fuza. We have Red Tekisho, Deputy President of Transform RSA in studio, and also J.R. Akotia, a student activist. Just how the Patriotic Front that the SACP is proposing, that they will form with organizations such as Save SA in defense of the Constitution. How do you translate that, or what do you read into that? What does it mean?
In our view, what it means is that we are correct in saying that we think that they are assisting this very same white monopoly capital which they denied as exist, because there is no way that a structure, a progressive structure like the South African Communist Party will be able to work or even partner with a structure such as Safe SA, because it's very clear for all of us that Safe SA has actually been established to counter progress that we are doing in this country in relation to transformation and a number of things. Now, if you are saying you are working with them, what are you saying actual to us is to say you help them to topple the current government that is there, because obviously we're talking about a lot of resources that are poured in those structures for us to be able to struggle and then changing the regime that is there. So if we are saying we are working with Safe SA for purpose of corruption, I'm saying there are so many structures that even the ANC, within the ANC, there are people, there are policies that are clear to say corruption is something that we all have to fight for. So why all of a sudden you having to choose a very reactionary structure for that matter to work with it to be able to say, no, you topple corruption? So I still maintain the point that all of this is really politics, is really factional, and be able to ensure that what is currently happening in terms of the ANC that is governing must be minimized and ultimately be toppled. And I think they're playing that role in our
No, I mean, by the ANC's admission as well, that there is a crisis. It's a party almost at war with itself. We've heard top leadership conceding to that corruption is a problem that has created divisions, and they need to clean that up. But in the interest of this strategic partnership with the SACP going forward, what you heard with the General Secretary, again, lambasting the fact that the Gupta family are the ones that are problematic, that everything that you read in the papers essentially is what he had regurgitated. And that, President Zuma is not invited to the SACP, and yet they say they're not factionalist. And they openly support, I almost said CR17, but Cyril Ramaphosa. So, Mr. Akotia, at your student level and activism, how do these politics playing out impact on not only your debates, but how this country can move forward in the interest of equality?
Okay, I think I'll start from the question and the surgeons which have been in the media for a long time about the question of state capture in itself. And I think at a student level, especially students who are in the humanities or the legal fraternity or in commerce, the first thing that you look at when it comes to the question of state capture is that what causes state capture? Is state capture limited to a few individuals who all of a sudden appear in a society, are painted as people who are currently looting the state? Or is state capture a permanent feature of the type of economic dispensation we find ourselves at as a country? And I think those are honest questions which aren't being answered right now by the SACP. Because the discussion we need to lead ourselves to is that on the road to the NDR, we're moving forward towards the NDR. We need to ask ourselves about the economic dispensation South Africa finds itself in. And if we want to eradicate the question of corruption, if we want to eradicate the question of state capture, how does a personalized attack on a particular individuals within a society serve to solve the problem? We need to admit that the environment or the society that we inherited from apartheid is not serving us well as a government. And as a country that is very young in terms of its democracy, we need to learn from the mistakes that we've made. And the only way that we can learn from mistakes that we've made is by changing our economic mode of production. And it comes with simple things in terms of building state capacity in order for you to cut out, for example, the private sector. Because capital in itself is a question of privatizations of resources which should be spread to the public. So I think that's a discussion that the SACP should be having at this stage, is a class question of saying that in whose class interest is the current economic mode of production. And we need those answers from our levels as students, because as working class students in institutions of higher learning, questions like free higher education and the question of transformation of our education system are questions which are pertinent to whose benefit. And if you're going to run a discussion that seeks to say that we must minus one person from the economic capitalist fray in order for things to be fine, it's not going to happen. It's not something that we need. We need a bigger discussion on how do we change state capture in the country and eliminate it as a whole.
Just to add, I think the issue of state capture is very clear to say it can't be myopic. You know, it can't be like very narrow. Because when we talk state capture, we need to go back and say what has happened in ESCOM, what has happened in
But seemingly there isn't an appetite for that. And I think we agree that we need to have a broader scope of investigation. It cannot be that corruption can be investigated, say, from, 94, based on the state of capture report. Yes. So that we can ventilate and see where the hemorrhaging of resources and money is really going. But I just want to come back to the mandate of the SACP. Have they lost, is there ideological bankruptcy in that sense, that as a communist party and having to look out primarily for workers' rights and the marginalized, that they haven't really fulfilled that mandate? Is there ideological bankruptcy in your view?
Yeah, my view is that there are some leaders who really feel strongly that the role that is currently played by the leaders in the party is a role that enhances, in a way, factionalism. Because it's very clear, it's glaring that there is a particular faction within the ANC that is supported by them. That's the first point. But having said that, there are also those who feel that the role of the party is really the role of a vanguard of the NDR, to ensure that all of us understands our role differently. You know, your COSATU, your party, and the ANC. And that is the role that must be played, because that's the role why they exist as the party, to be able to assist us politically to do the right things. But there are those that feel that they are not doing that anymore, but they rather focus on what is happening in the ANC, as opposed to really having to be able to place themselves correctly and ensuring that they must be able to guide. They are no more guiding, they are inwardly looking into who must be the leader in the ANC.
All right, Mr. Fraser,
so they're not really supposed to worry about what is happening in the ANC as they are doing currently, but really to guide and ensure that the ANC does not lose sight of the NDR that all of us aspire to.
Mr. Fraser, are you also of the view that the SACP essentially has lost its relevance in terms of as a communist party, and primarily in their mandate of pursuing labor reform?
Indeed. Let's face facts. Factual politics it is, indeed, and this is done to divide and rule. And here is the real thing, I believe. The SACP is similar to the concoction of DA, EFF, COPE, UDM that harks at the ANC. It seems that every effort is being made to actually steer the voters away from the ANC. The strategic interest groups and those that form a deep state in this country will do whatever it takes that the national elections will not go all to the ANC. According to them, the ANC shouldn't have more than 50% of the vote, preferably less, to force it forming and partaking in a multi-party government. And this is what they want. And that way, then the deep state will have won its day.
I just want to talk about how we deal with the monopoly or the oligopoly, if you will, in terms of the economic transformation. The radicalism, we can debate it another day. But if state means or institutions and levers are not the enablers of transforming our economy to at least have some balance in how we access opportunities, JR, what then is the hope that South Africa has?
Look, the reality is that in order for more people to be able to access the heights of economy, there needs to be a government that is willing to foster that type of growth. Now, in order for us to foster that type of growth, we need to ask ourselves that in terms of the sectors, because this thing of monopoly capital is not just something that a person wakes up and conceives. It's to say that in terms of 5-6 sectors in our country, there are certainly specific individuals from specific companies that are in charge of those sectors. And we need to begin to say to ourselves that how much is too much for company A? How much is too much for company B? And a question on market caps has been one that we've shied away from for a very long time as this country. And we need to begin to engage a policy in terms of, if we want economic growth, in terms of people who come from disadvantaged backgrounds, we need to start opening up a question of market caps. Market caps, number one, in terms of foreign direct investment into our markets. So a simple example would be the fast food market in South Africa. You have a Chisasinyama franchise, which is South African in itself, which is suffering within the market, hemorrhaging from retailers like McDonald's, KFC, and Burger King. We need to ask ourselves that how do we keep the market to ensure that those type of companies are able to thrive, so that we don't sit back and say that, you know what we want to do is want to grow the economy, everybody must be able to access the heights of economy, but we don't put legislative measures in place. And legislative measures in themselves is not a question of saying that the person who runs the fastest, but it's also in the question of township economy development. A simple example is what has been done by ShopRite this week, where they've now put up containers in townships as spaza shops. And already in the townships in South Africa, we face a crisis of our generic spaza shop or indigenous spaza shop owners from Somali spaza shop owners. Now you have a further onslaught from this very same white monopoly capital. And we need to be able to create those spaces so that our people are able to access the heights of economy, but not also only access the heights of economy, but also to have their bread and butter issues taken care of. Because most of the times in majority of these discussions, we're talking about people who don't envisage themselves making $1 million or $2 million, but we're talking about people who want to go to bed at night with food on the table and wake up in the morning and take their children to school.
Yeah.
Just to add, I think the other thing that is very critical, and there are two issues. The first one is, I think we lacked the will of implementation, and I would say that because when you look at the people that we have deployed, the ANC has deployed, you find Werksman, for instance, a typical example of Transnet. What is happening there? They still appoint Werksman as a white firm, but there are a number of black firms that is equally capable of dealing with these issues. So I'm saying you have people that are deployed in this particular position who are afraid to take decisions. That's one. But the second one is you take decisions, for instance, but you don't monitor, you don't follow up on the decisions that you are taking. So I'm saying there are policies that are very good, they are ripe to be implemented.
Yeah, but I just want to come back. Yeah.
We lack people who can do that.
Correct, but how did the SACP, I know the conference continues until the end of the week, but how do they position themselves so far as being that very answer that is going to deliver the aspirations of an economic prosperity for the majority, Mr. Fuza? Or is it your view that essentially it's been grandstanding and speaking to the gallery?
It certainly is addressing the gallery, and it's definitely grandstanding. Deals will be cut from now onwards until even beyond the elections of 2019. so that those who own the economy will certainly have a say and will not lose the control over the economy. That is a definite and seems to be a non-negotiable, because they have their lobby groups, their foundations, the NGO industry. They have a whole lot of lieutenants, a whole lot of philanthropic organizations that will make damn sure that they will not lose. And you could see it really when the Oppenheimers applied for their own pass for their own airport in South Africa, and they didn't receive it because of the then Minister of Home Affairs, Mulusi Kwigaba. He did not allow this. So you could see already the media took a very strong stance against the Minister of Home Affairs. So they do play the field, and they know exactly. They've been around for a very long time. It was Hendrik French, the architect of apartheid, who said in 1963 that the Oppenheimers, for example, are that strong they can close down South Africa overnight if they want to. And that was back in 1963. And today we're writing 2017, much later. I'm sure the power is still there, if not much bigger than it was then.
All right, we're going to have to let you go. Thank you so much, Udo Fuza, political analyst and commentator. Just final comments from our studio guests in the relationship going forward with the ANC, whether it is time it's gotten to a point where it's simply untenable. What is your view, Retikisho?
Yeah, now I think there is still a need, to be honest, there's still a need for us to work together, all of us, tripartite together with SANCO. But people must also understand that the ANC is leading this alliance. And if there are problems that they have within the alliance, the better way of dealing with is to discuss them amongst themselves. But the alliance is still very relevant. And I think we hope that the conference that they have will be able to resolve this matter, not to break away. Because if they are breaking away, all of us are going to be losers at the end of the day.
Are you of the view that, at this stage of the second transition, as it were, that the alliance needs to be preserved in order to realize the aspirations of our country?
I believe the alliance needs to be preserved. I think something that a lot of people forget in this whole question of the contestation of state power, which has now come up in the SACP, is a question of what then happens to the alliance post the contestation of the state power. Because in terms of the alliance, you had the SACP, which was the vanguard of the working class. And if we do agree as the alliance to say that, for example, the SACP must contest, then the question becomes what then becomes the role of the ANC. And it's not a mechanical question which can be answered willy-nilly, but it's also a question that we need to ask ourselves in terms of what direction are we moving in as an alliance as a whole. And have we really reached that time where the ANC is ailing at such a level that the SACP would need to contest state power? Because how I envisage the contestation of state power, it's not really a question about whether the SACP will contest the ANC, but it's rather a bigger question of, in the situation that the SACP contests state power, does the ANC still have a reason to contest? And if it does, then we need to question the initial objectives of the alliance in the first place.
And whether it going forward will strengthen or further divide the party. But thanks indeed for joining us. That's J.R. Akotia, a student activist, Udo Fuza, political analyst and columnist, and Lucky Tekisho, Deputy President of Transform RSA. Thanks again for joining us. We'll take a quick ad break and see you shortly.